Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Attrition rates usually follow a bell curve, but apparently the winter break knocked off some people off the charts.
Well, I know just a couple of people at the middle of the
Yes, and Rosenheck, thank God, had a grandson this afternoon.
Oh, wonderful!
And they are heading to L.A. as
Yay!
we speak. Thank God. So everybody has good reasons not to be here.
Yes.
May they only be good reasons. Okay, last we spoke, we missed a week in between. Hopefully you had a nice break, if you had a break. And if not, I hope you get a nice break sometime soon. We had our first staycation, and we're alive to talk about it, so that was nice. We did get past state lines. We did cross the Tennessee border, Chattanooga. We actually...
That's the wilderness.
to the contingency. So that was nice. But it's nice to be home. And somebody pointed out to me that vacation is effective insofar as it excites you to get back into routine. So, in that sense, I definitely got a real serious vacation. Need I say anything else? Okay, we are surprisingly up to Pasuk Daled, verse 4. Thank you very much. Went through the entire article. Very, very important. Robert Fritz. We'll get there. Okay, verse 4. So let's jump in again. Let's talk about what we have spoken about and, indeed, what we haven't spoken about. So God observes, as it were, the light, and He notices, or He states, that it is good. Vayavdel Elokim bein ha'or ubein ha'choshech. And apparently, the word therefore needs to be stuck in here. Therefore, God divided between the light and the darkness. Now, the reason why I say therefore must be put in here is in order to understand the flow of the verse. What am I talking about? So before I speak, I always allow everyone else to speak. So speak your mind.
All right, what the heck are you talking about?
Good. Well done. That's a good question. Sure. So the question is, what is the verse stating? If I had to ask you to summarize the verse, what is the Torah telling us in this verse? What would you say?
Well, it's kind of odd because you have to be able to, I would think you have to be able to separate the concept, what the light was, from the dark and see that it was good. I mean, wouldn't you mean? I mean, because the next piece of it is that Kim divided the light from the darkness. It doesn't make sense that it would, to me, that it would be, if they were not divisible, how could you divide it? If they were inseparable, how could you divide it? And if there wasn't a reason for separating it, why would you?
So if I understand you correctly, what you're suggesting is, in order to identify one of two components, they need to be separated to begin with. If they're not separated, then you can't identify one of those two components.
I would think. So it's like soup, I mean, if you have salt and tomato sauce and all stock and water, and then it's one continuous mush.
Good. But let me ask you the following question. Let's say I create the carrots before they go into the soup.
Then it's separable at that point.
So they are separable prior to their combination with other ingredients. And we know that the second pasuk in the Chumash talks about, or the third, tells us that God created the light. So now the question is that enough of a creation of the object to be able to identify it prior to its getting mixed into something else, apparently? Now, of course, we're not told between verse 3 and verse 4 that Choshech was somehow mixed into light. Now, you and I would say, what do you mean mixed in? Light and darkness cannot coexist. By definition, if there's light, there's no darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. Unless it's not.
Well, maybe it wasn't what we perceive light and dark to be.
The what?
Maybe it was not what we perceive light and dark to be.
There we go. That's what we have to say. Otherwise, we're going to get really confused because we're going to say, what do you mean he separated light from darkness? You can't. They are inseparable. One is the flip side of the other. One is the absence of the other. Unless maybe it's not the absence, but rather a different entity. Was darkness created, or is darkness the absence of light?
Darkness was there first.
Don't look at me like that.
No, chaos was there first. Couldn't it be like grayish, couldn't it be like grayish, right? Combination of the two?
What?
Like grayish, like
Gray matter?
white and dark, and it comes out gray, and it's real cloudy and semi-dark.
One thing is for sure is that we're still in a state of chaos and confusion, both figuratively and actually. Yeah.
God created the darkness.
Are you making a statement?
Yeah, I'm making a statement. I'm
Okay.
going to continue with it. And then he created the light. Let's assume, which we can do anything we want actually. Let's assume that he had a ball of fire, the sun, whatever you want to call it, and threw it in there. But it wasn't shining upon, it was shining by itself. It was just a globe, a ball of fire. And he said, look, I like that. That's good. So he takes the sun or the light and takes it out of the dark and makes the day, makes the light here. And he has separated it from the darkness. I'm trying to get my words out. So that you can have darkness at the same time you have light, because it's just a ball of light. It may not be radiating other than in itself. And he separates that and says, I like this. This is good. And he separates them that way.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand fully what you're saying, but let me react, even though I don't feel ready to react. And that is, surprisingly, we only find on day 4 of creation that the luminaries are created. So in other words, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all those radiant celestial beings that are hanging the celestial chandelier out there was only created on day 4, which means that the light that's created right here and the separation between light and darkness is not, I wouldn't even say not necessarily, it's not talking about the light of the sun. Okay. The sun is an object that's created on day 4 to generate light. So the light and darkness that we're referring to here, I don't know if it's concepts or reality, just we don't have a light source yet to shine upon the earth.
So maybe it's whatever it is.
Metaphoric.
Yes. When it says the light was good, maybe it meant good as in good versus evil. Like
good.
There's good and bad. And when he separated them, it was the separation, not of physical light and darkness, but that they shouldn't be intermingling together and they should be separated.
Good.
They should be able to see good and evil.
Good.
Yeah. Because we talked about the spiritual light and the physical light. And if we're talking separating the darkness, the light and the darkness as being the spiritual, then what is day at that point and what's night?
Good.
It is not...
There is no day yet.
Yes,
That's what I'm saying.
but at this point, we don't
Good
have
question.
day or night.
You're making an assumption, and again, I think we would all make that assumption until we realize that the day and night, as we know it, didn't exist yet until the luminaries were put in. Yeah.
So, as soon as you said before God hung out the celestial chandelier on day 4, I'm going, wait a second, what's before that? And so what I track to is the idea of the Big Bang, as we understand it, or in a very limited way that I understand it at all, is you had this vortex of thing black hole is, the concept of a black hole, is so intense that it destroys everything to it, and not even light can get out of it. And then all of a sudden the Big Bang happens and blasts out everything, and it's supposedly from my limited understanding, which is almost zero, explodes out this thing, maybe called light, and that's the initial creative force in the universe that Hashem puts out in the universe.
So you're calling light energy?
Energy, force, creation, the tools of creation, everything in it.
So that's also equated to day.
So we're going to get stuck with using that definition because that's a very general definition of just an energy force out there before we start getting into the details of God creates light. Now, God created light after creation took place, which seems to indicate not like what you're saying.
Again, God created light after creation took place.
Correct.
Yeah.
So in other words, if the Big Bang, the way Ramban, Nachmanides, and others understand the concept of the Big Bang, meaning from one point there was just this explosion of expanse of potential energy that ended up developing over the course of 6 days into everything that we know to exist. So if that's the case, then verse 3 is post-creation, and we're introduced to God creating light. So it would seem to me that the energy of creation and light are two separate things. Understand what I'm saying?
At least halfway.
Now I know, I'm going to say which half, and you'll say the other half. Right. We know your type now. All I'm saying is that in the chronological sequence of these verses, you have Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz. Everything is created in potential form, and then in verse 3 we have Vayomer Elokim yehi or, which is a secondary step in creation. So that sounds like the energy of creation is not the same thing as the light that's created in verse 3. That's all I'm suggesting. Anybody with me? Not with me?
Well, except going back to what you said, the creation may have been whatever this is that the Big Bang came out of.
It also doesn't make sense what I said because, like if it says earlier, and there was darkness on the face of the surface of the abyss, and God's Spirit hovered over the, water. Well, it suggests that there's some other kind of form or reference point of some sort for that to happen on. So I'm
That means creation already exists when God says, "Let there be light."
Mm-hmm.
At least metaphorically, if not more, but we don't know.
Okay, but either way, what I'm suggesting is that at least to read the verses without understanding may get us into some thorny issues.
Like we're not getting now.
Right. At least we have some clarity within the chaos. Or at least we're attempting to get there. Okay, so that's the question. The question is, God sees light that it's good. Right? Question number 1 is, what is good? Right? So Charlotte wanted to mention that good as opposed to evil, which is interesting. It's definitely a possibility. I believe 2 weeks ago somebody else mentioned that good was, I think Dottie, you mentioned, that good was the ultimate fulfillment of the potential of that object. Okay? Another possibility. Again, we won't know for certain, until we start noticing a pattern of the usage of the word. It's very difficult when you don't have a precedent to base yourself upon to, we can conjecture from today till next year, or actually for the next 10 years, over the next few verses. We can conjecture about what these mean, but at least at this point, it's definitely a possibility, and it's definitely a rational possibility. So v'yar Elokim es ha'or ki tov, and then the second half of the verse is v'yavdel Elokim bein ha'or bein ha'choshev. So God divides between the light and the darkness. Okay? There's an obvious question here, an elephant in the room.
This is the first mention of darkness, isn't it?
This is not.
Oh. No, darkness covered. Oh.
And I'm not sure if you're asking this by mentioning that is this darkness the same darkness as what was just mentioned?
Right.
Right? It would seem that word choshech prior in verse 2 seems to be talking about a concept that is so far beyond our understanding that it wouldn't seem to be describing just the simple absence of light. So it would seem that this choshech and that choshech is not necessarily the same. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Nachmanides indicates that to us in his understanding of the verses. So what is the obvious question of this verse? We spoke about this 2 weeks ago, I believe. And
What's the question? I mean, was he having elephant in the room?
yes. Didn't notice him?
I didn't want to say anything.
If you need the tune.
Jeopardy?
Is that your final?
There's no lifelines here. You can call a friend.
You may have covered this already, but
What is darkness?
Hold on, just 1 second.
an almost thought is that if God created light, why would he have to divide the light from darkness?
Explain.
In the third verse it says, when Kim said, let there be light, and there was light. And God created light.
Okay?
Ex nihilo, he creates light.
Okay?
And then God saw the light was good, and he divided the light from the darkness. To create anything, it's creation, telling its creation to itself. Why do you need to separate it then from something else?
In order to clarify. Division clarifies.
Good, why would it change?
Excellent. Okay, Carla just nailed it.
What is that?
Okay, repeat it, please.
If something is good, why would you change it?
Right? Seems like a pretty obvious question.
Why is it being changed?
Yeah, if it's good, leave it. Right? If you recall, the famous dictum, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
How is it being fixed? I'm not quite following.
Well, apparently something is being done to it. Usually if something is perfect as is, then no further acts are necessary to be done to it.
Means it's complete.
What's complete?
The light.
So you're defining Tov as complete.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Then
If
why
it's
do you have to
complete,
separate the
then
darkness when they do
what else is there to do?
Right.
Complete means no further steps necessary to complete because it is already there. So it seems that the Torah is presenting us a sequence. God saw the light was good, therefore he divided the light from the darkness. If it's good, leave it. Move on.
Maybe it means that everything we see may not be everything there is. We may have to always look further.
How do you see that here?
It's a lesson. If it said that the light was good, then we would think that, okay, it's good, it's fine, leave it. But because Hashem did something else to it, it meant that it really wasn't complete.
Okay, so then was it
So
Tov?
we assume something is...
Was it Tov or was it not Tov? So you're suggesting that from a human perspective, we can sometimes identify something as good, but we really don't fully appreciate what or how good or perhaps the elements of the negative elements in this, and that we have to reassess in order to further clarify.
Right.
True. But this is talking about God.
Maybe he didn't want it contaminated by the darkness.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, he didn't want the darkness to infringe upon the light.
Okay. Good. Hold that thought.
But why does it necessarily mean that it still wasn't good? I mean, this is a whole process here. I mean, it's the process of evolution. The light is good, that's fine. but now you have to take that good and maybe you have to now use it. So you're using the light in the physical sense now to create the day. So I mean, it's just...
You're ahead of yourself, right? Because at this point, we don't know anything about the placement of the light and the allocation of light.
But right. But it's because of the process.
Right. The question is, why is there an in-between process of separating or doing something to the light? It could just very easily say, God saw the light was good, and he gave it its own domain, called day. And we would save some ink and definitely save a lot of time of discussion.
Everything he's doing is to, everything he's doing, using the word evolution, is for his final plan to give this to us. Okay? Now, if that is the case, he wants us to see the good. I'm asking, not telling. He wants us to see the good. To do that, we need the day. We need the light, as opposed to the darkness. He wants us to appreciate what he is creating for us. Because the whole idea of what he's doing is not just for him, it's for us.
Okay, so far so good.
So
now
I'm thinking...
Where are you heading with that?
What I'm thinking is that when he saw that it was good, he's, in his mind, if you want to call it that, mankind is going to see this, and he's going to see what I have done for him. So I'm going to take the light separated from the darkness so that he can see what I have done for him. Leaving the darkness for time, now you rest. I don't mean the seventh day. I'm not talking about Shabbat at this point. I'm just trying to understand, if you will.
Join the club.
What he But his whole purpose is to do everything that he is doing. He's leading to the creation of man.
It's true. No question about it.
Everything he's doing. So he is setting this up, creating this for us, and every act that he does, everything that he thinks of, that he creates, is for the final point for man.
True. Again. And where are you heading?
I wish I knew.
Good. So I will agree with you, Frank. What you just said was excellent.
No, I'm very serious. I wish I knew. I don't know what he's doing.
I agree with you 100%. In fact, we're going to have to understand the entire context of the progression as we lead up to man's creation, of understanding this as the backdrop, as all the props and everything, heralding in man's creation on day 6. There's no question about that. I'm not sure exactly how that helps us understand
I see
this particular step per se. So I agree with your statement. I just don't see the relevance over here.
All right. We're still in chaos, though.
We're going to be in chaos for a while.
I don't mean you and me. I don't mean us.
I didn't think I was in chaos until I took the test.
You weren't in chaos until he told us we were in chaos.
As a bonus for graduation, I will pay for your therapy.
So 2 thoughts about, that I have at the moment, about this why make this statement here about him dividing light and darkness, is that one is what it says down in Rashi's, while we bought this book with the big Rashi about.
Good. I was waiting for somebody to point that out, because we did see Rashi last time around, and I was waiting for somebody to jump back in.
I know we took a quick look at it last time.
We did. In fact, I was waiting for somebody to say that. Thank you.
So that's one thing. It separated he saw that it was not fitting for the wicked should have the use of it, the light, and was set apart for the rights of the world to come. Okay, so that makes sense in the context. And secondarily...
Well, I'm going to nitpick on that statement. What does that mean? It makes sense in the...
Can I get away with that?
No. You can. I didn't hear what you just said. Go on.
No.
You didn't hear what I just said about that?
I just want to show you that I am actually listening to what you're saying.
The second thought was that...
What did you say?
Is it fine? Thanks. So the second thought was that I think it would make sense to me, that's based on that article that I sent to, or similar thinking. That's a great visual.
Exhibit A.
But that God would be explaining to us that in his infinite wisdom, makes distinctions and teaches us to make distinctions, to understand one thing against another.
Good.
So even to observe anything and to label it, and even to label it as separate, let alone good. And then
Good. I think what you're making an excellent point, which we will actually see the profundity of as we proceed. Because I will give you a heads up that over the next few days, that is, in the verses, read over the next few years, we will notice that there is much in the way of division and separation. Because if indeed we deal with potential creation as being just this massive soup mix, and then we have to now subsequently divide, separate, and identify, and we mentioned that the light is going to help us do that, because the light is not just physical light. Remember what we said? It is spiritual light, which means it is a light of essence, which means that when I look at this book, I don't just see the cover. I see it for what it is, not for what it looks like. And that is the essential difference between physical light and spiritual light. We mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, that perhaps what is being suggested by this verse, that God separated between the light and the darkness, is indeed read the word light as spiritual light, and he separated that from the darkness, read physical light, that is called darkness in comparison to spiritual light, which is called real light. Everybody get what I just said? So maybe the terms here of Or and Choshech are dissimilar to what our preconceived notion is, and that is not light and darkness as we know it. When you flip the switch, the light goes off, the light goes on, but rather spiritual light, which allows us to see things for what they really are, i.e. to really see, versus physical light, which in our opinion, in the Torah's opinion, is choshech, is darkness, because it does not allow us to really see, because it is deceptive, it is illusory, it only shines on the surface, and therefore we can't possibly really see something for what it is without the spiritual light. Everybody follow me on that? Mm-hmm. Okay? Now I'd like to... Go ahead.
Except that several sessions ago, I think you said that you can know more in the darkness.
Yeah.
Because you don't have...
the distraction of the veneer.
Right. Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're saying here. That the spiritual light is called real light as opposed to physical light, which the verse terms here as choshech, darkness. Because indeed, you cannot see in light. Now that may sound strange, but you can't really see in light because all light does is bounce off the surface and show you what's going on the surface, but not
what goes on underneath.
Not the essence of that object. So physical light, light bulbs, incandescent bulbs, are actually darkness in this verse.
Okay.
Whereas light is actually referring to spiritual light, which allows us to really see. That's exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Is that understood? If it's not understood, we can't go on. Okay? So God is now separating between what is termed Or and termed Choshech. Read spiritual light versus physical light. Physical light is called darkness in comparison to spiritual light, which is called light, because it actually illuminates. It allows us to see the true reality. Okay. So, once we say that, let's just go on to the next verse quickly. Vayikra Elokim la'or yom. He calls Or yom, v'lachoshech kara loyla, and he calls darkness night. Vayi'era vayivoker yom echad. Now, the next verse seems to indicate the light and darkness as being physical light and darkness. Right? The way we know it to be true. So somewhere along the way, we're shifting gears into this Or and Choshech. Because somewhere along the way, Choshech, becomes physical light, not spiritual light. Spiritual light is Or. But let's hold that thought for one moment. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi tells us, take a look under the line, Daled 4, that Elokim saw that the light was good and divided. Rashi, as we explained, never articulates his question. So it's the ultimate game of Jeopardy to work backwards and to extrapolate from his comments to figure out what nuance in the text was not clear to him and hence shouldn't be clear to us, and then figure out how his answer is really answering the question that we should have had. So in other words, the best way to figure out if you've read the verse correctly and you've asked the appropriate questions is take a look at Rashi and see if he comments. And if he does, you have to align your question with his question. But he never shares us his question. So what is bothering Rashi here? Rashi sees the words, and those words in bold are important keywords to clue us in as to what was bothering Rashi, because the words that are used as a starting verse of his commentary are the words that he is looking at and he is commenting upon. So apparently he has a problem with these words. Vayar Elokim es ha'or ki tov, vayavdel. God saw the light was good and he separated. Well, it sounds very much like the question that Carla mentioned. If it was good, then what more needs to be done? Why do anything to it?
But then, to go from your theme, if the good aspect of light is the spiritual light, then perhaps the darkness is the physical light. So maybe you need to get the spiritual light away from the physical light.
Why?
Because, well, Rashi is saying, because the spiritual light...
We didn't get to Rashi yet. Let's take a look at Rashi.
Because you don't want... Well...
Good. Hold on. Hold that thought. So take a look at what Rashi says. Rashi seems to be troubled by the continuity of the verse. There's no continuation. There's God sees the light is good, and then he divides. So, before we even see Rashi, we have to understand the word vayavdil, the Hebrew word that is used here, that's translated as the word divided, can actually be understood in two different ways. The root of the word vayavdil is Beis Dalid Lamed, Badal. That word, that root is found in the common custom on Saturday night. Havdalah. Havdalah means separation. What are we separating? We're separating between Shabbos and the rest of the week. So that term, Havdalah, means something. Now, it's possible that it means to set something apart or to divide. Now, you may be thinking, that sounds pretty much the same. It's just a question of semantics. Or is it?
No.
No. Thank you. It's not a question of semantics. There are two separate concepts. To divide something means to take it and separate it from something else. To set something aside doesn't require any act of separation. It just requires a removal of sorts. Yeah?
It has to be used again.
That's correct. But it's not as though it's entangled and we need to split it apart from anything else. It clearly comes as a part of something, but we are now taking it and setting it aside.
Well, to me, divide means taking one thing and
Separating, right?
And separate means...
No, that wasn't the other term. To set apart, not to separate. Separate and divide is the same. To set apart...
Okay, set apart. So, set apart, divide is to take one thing and cut it in the middle or any way you want to and...
Right, well said.
Separate...
Hold on.
Set apart is to take two different things, two separate things, and push it aside from the other thing.
Right, but not necessarily implying that there is some, thank you, Does
He
this
just
Google?
gave you that for you to keep.
It's just a dictionary program.
Okay.
It might be a civilian.
Okay, let's just read this. Not that this is going to. Okay.
Don't.
Hold on. To separate means to keep apart or divide as by an intervening barrier or space. To separate two fields by a fence. Okay. To set apart. Oh, so this is going to confuse us. Because the definition of separate is to set apart. No, sorry.
Don't we do it?
Technology today.
Don't we deal with this in the Shema?
Don't we deal with it in the Shema?
Well, what we're talking about there, I'm thinking, is when God says, don't follow with your heart or your eyes, which lead you astray.
Okay.
He's not saying that they're horrible things, but put that out. Just separate them. Don't follow your heart. Don't follow your eyes. But these words which I command you today, engrave them on your soul.
Okay, I would say that it's a slightly different topic because that is more of a restraint factor of controlling yourself not to follow them. But it's not an act of...
In regard to God, no. But in regard to man, yes.
I wouldn't say it's setting apart anything. I would say it's controlling your urges, which would naturally lead you in there. I don't want to belabor the point because it's going to distract us, but thank you.
I think when you say divide something, it means you have an item unto itself, and you're going to break it up into different parts. To separate something, to separate things means you have this and that, and you're going to put them away from each other.
So again, we're getting confused because to me, divide and separate are the same. To set apart is the contrasting term.
I think when you divide,
not to separate, to set apart.
when you divide in something, you're going to be giving it to equally to whoever. But when you're setting apart something, you're keeping it aside, maybe for something
Later on, it's an experiment.
Good.
Like Alex.
No, it's like an experiment. I mean, you have to set something apart. If you're setting apart, you're going to possibly use it later.
Good. Okay? So again, it's either division, which requires there to be a mixture of sorts, and we're separating them, or it means to set apart, which doesn't require there to be any mixture.
Right.
It's setting something aside, as it were. Okay? So Rashi deals with both realities and reads into the verse those two possibilities. Now, again, Rashi's system is not to invent his own explanation per se, but rather to cite a midrashic source, which predates him by thousands of years. But what he's doing is he's trying to pin the midrash, as it were, on the verse. Because the midrash needs allusions in the verse to connect the oral understanding to the written understanding. So if we can be clued in to some indication of that particular midrashic text, that is what Rashi is searching. So Rashi had at his command, at his disposal, as it were, all the entire corpus of midrashic works, and he is saying, ooh, I found a nuance, a detail here. Now, either we could look at that detail and say, it's wrong, or it's a mistake, or that detail is actually quite necessary because that's the red flag or the red X that says, dig here, because this is where you're going to find the gem. So we comb through the verse and we try to find even the slightest nuance. Now, of course, you and I are going to have a difficult time doing that because we don't have the sensitivity to the language and we don't notice all the details. So part of our training is to see Rashi's commentary, to figure out his question, and then to say, oh, I didn't even realize that there was anything that was different. Because to me, it's all different, or it's all the same. But here is a classic example. The word vayavdel can mean one of two things. Either it can mean that he divided, or it can mean that he set apart. Both fit into that root. Conceptually, they're different, but they both fit into that root. Therefore, Rashi says that, on the second line, he saw that it was not fitting that the wicked should have the use of it, which means this light. He therefore, key words, set it apart for the righteous in the world to come. So we have this as a midrashic teaching. Rashi says, where can I find an allusion in the verse? This word. Because this word can mean to set something apart. As Carla mentioned, to set something apart indicates that it is being set apart for use at a particular time or for a particular person. And indeed, that's what Rashi tells us. Rashi says that God, as it were, pulled back this spiritual light that permeated the entire creation. And he said, whoa, this is going to be a special light for special people. For people that deserve to have access to it. And we'll explain in a moment. But God pulled it back, didn't make this available to all, but rather set it apart for use for the righteous in the world to come. Okay. But we're still left with another definition of the term vayavdel, and that is to divide. And to divide means that you have something entangled, something mixed in one with the other, and we need to pull it apart. Says Rashi, according to its simple meaning without the midrashic explanation, we would say, explain it as follows. He saw that it was good, meaning the light was good on its own. And it is therefore improper that it, the light, and darkness should function together in confusion. So he established that one be bounded by the day and the other be bounded by the night. So in other words, the word prior, I think, Joel, you said allocation, right? Key word is allocation, to separate the particular domain and arena where these things function. Because to function in a mixture would not be good. Light is good on its own. When it is confused or compromised by another element that dilutes it, it is not good anymore. So Rashi is helping us understand why what's the connection between the first half and the second half of the verse? God's light was good and therefore he separated it. I thought it's good. The answer is, indeed. It's because it was good that he had to make sure that either it was allocated to people that deserve to have access to it, or to separate it from those elements that may perhaps compromise its goodness.
So how can you tie it in when Moshe's mom said this child was exceptionally good?
That's a great question, but I'm going to hold off on getting into that.
I'm confused because he's saying two different uses for the light. One, Hashem takes it away and puts it over here for the righteous, but yet is there light left over that didn't go there that he left to separate?
Good. Excellent point. Please take and pass. I apologize, the quality of the copy is not the best, but... Okay, what was that? Yes, I was going to say, anybody that has ever read any of Rabbi Tanta's works understands that this isn't bedtime reading material. This is pretty intense stuff. Rabbi Tat is a big student of the Maharal. The Maharal was one of the preeminent thinkers of the Jewish people, lived in, I believe it was the 17th century, and the Maharal always introduces us to a deeper analysis and a deeper understanding of things that seem trivial and maybe even silly. And it's only because we're looking at the surface and we're not looking at the depth of the matter. So this is really in the middle of the piece, talking about the concept of evil. And he is actually talking about the mate, the parshios, the Torah portions that we're studying now. Here are Shmos. And we just finished talking about the plagues that were wrought upon Egypt. And interestingly enough, the mate, the staff of Moshe, is a very significant piece of this entire story. And we're not told that much about it in the text, and we kind of find it perhaps strange that Moshe needs a tool of sorts to carry out all these different things. So he wonders, and I'm just going to read it quickly. Let us try to perceive more deeply. Firstly, we notice a pervasive duality in the mata, in the staff. It is engraved with Hashem's name, the four-letter name, Yud, He, and Vav, He, which is the name of kindness and compassion, the name of all-encompassing kindness, but also with the plagues. We're told that the acronym that we say on Seder night, Yitzhak, Adash, Ba'achav, were actually engraved in the staff itself. So it seems paradoxical that we have the name of compassion engraved in the same staff that the plagues, which would seem to be the exact opposite of compassion, to be written on the same staff. But also with the plagues, manifestations of Hashem's strict punitive justice. It is used to perform miracles of salvation and sustenance for the Jewish people, but acts as a rod of retribution for the Egyptians. It punishes evil, but is capable of becoming an embodiment of evil. What he's referring to is when God transforms the staff into a snake. The sages tell us that snake refers all the way back to the beginning of creation, the original snake, which was the embodiment of evil. So, what's going on with the staff? It just doesn't make sense. It punishes evil, but is capable of becoming an embodiment of evil. It is to serve Moshe as a sign to the Jewish people, proving Hashem's appearance to him, to assure him that they will believe him, but simultaneously chastises him for having stated that they would not believe. In the hand, it is a manifestation of the divine, stretching back to the creation. Cast to the earth, it is a manifestation of that primal evil, which also originates at the beginning of time. So, intriguing.
Where did he get the staff in the first place?
Well, that's a story in and of itself. But it really, it goes all the way back to Adam.
Right.
Right.
But how did Moshe come upon it?
Well, Moshe pulled it out of Yisro's backyard.
I thought he
And
was a
Yisro,
staff store.
and Yisro, he was a staff. He went to the staff sergeant. And Yisro got it from someone else. It's very interesting to see.
You mean it's been passed down? So
Yes, it was passed down, and those that were unable to use it, those that didn't merit using it, were not able to pull it out of the ground.
Like the down in the sword. Sword.
Now you know where they got it from. But don't tell anyone.
Isn't it said nothing is
But
original?
everybody that
That's right.
needed to know knew where it was?
Yeah, surprisingly. Okay.
He's just acting
What?
that way. Yeah.
Okay. So, what's the deal? Let us go yet deeper. There is an idea that evil is not created in the world. However, it is certainly made possible. Changing that possibility into a reality is our choice. Hold on. Listen to what he has to say. This is very powerful but very deep stuff. If we do not pervert the world, it remains good. If we deflect it from its natural state, we bring evil into being. There's a mystical source which indicates that the higher worlds are created straight, and that this finite physical world represents a bending of that straightness. Once a bend has occurred, there is a danger. When all is straight, no error can be made. When a bend manifests, error has not become inevitable, but it has become decidedly possible. A mashal, an allegory, will make this clear. If a person walks along a perfectly straight road, he can never lose sight of his point of origin. All that is required is to turn around and look back, and it will be clearly seen. But once the road forks, once the traveler has turned onto a road which is at an angle to his previous path, he can no longer see home. When he looks back, he sees only a lonely fork in a lonely road. It becomes possible to forget where the origin is. And that is how the world is built. The higher worlds are straight, and the angelic inhabitants of those worlds see reality plainly, undeniably, and of course, are not free to forget it. But we, inhabitants of the finite see only the finite as a point of origin. To see the spiritual, one must be able to see around corners. One has to be able to see into a dimension which is essentially invisible from here. The very fact of a finite creation intrinsically hides the spiritual. I cannot overstate that line. Reality as we know it is a shield. And that's how God created it. It intrinsically hides the spiritual. Of course, that is not bad. Listen to what he's saying. It's not bad. Why? Because it provides the framework within which to exercise free will. One can look at the world and choose to see its incredible beauty, its plan and purpose, its glow. That is the correct utilization of the smokescreen of the world, to penetrate it. But one can just as easily see it as skin deep, finite only, filled with random accident, and that is bad. Good and bad lie only in the choice of perception. Okay? It was worth you joining this course just to read that. Okay? It is the most profound understanding of the concepts of good and evil, and the concepts of good and evil coming from an all-good God. Because evil is moving away from God. The smokescreen is actually good in that it allows us to choose the relationship. Otherwise, it's like saying that somebody that's shackled next to someone else shouldn't be rewarded for their loyalty because they have no choice in the matter than to be there. So if you have no choice in the matter, you can't possibly have a real relationship. As soon as there's a possibility of you not having that relationship, then the relationship becomes meaningful. And that's exactly the purpose of the smokescreen, so that we can penetrate it, so that those that decide not to choose to penetrate it are lost in the surface, but those that choose to penetrate it get beyond the surface and see reality for what it really is. Okay? Let's just read the last paragraph. It doesn't add to our understanding, but it enhances. The effort of seeing the invisible, of seeing around corners, is called remembering. The Torah mitzvah of remembering, deeply spiritually, is the mitzvah of opening a pathway to higher perception. Remembering the creation, our origin as a people at the Exodus from Egypt, our origins as the people of the Torah at Sinai, is our lifeline. And indeed, all of our holidays are all throwbacks to those three essential events. Creation of the Jewish people, and the spiritual creation of the Jewish people. In fact, the command to remember Sinai is phrased thus: be careful and guard your soul well, lest you forget the things which your eyes have seen, the day on which you stood before Hashem at Horeb, which is another name for Sinai. Not remember, but lest you forget. The natural condition of the Jewish people is remembrance, is connection. We are always at Sinai. That is our natural mode. We need only take care not to forget it. So, when we talk about good and evil, and when we talk about light and darkness, they are one and the same. Because indeed, what we're saying is, good is the ability to perceive the reality of things beyond the surface. The opposite, choshech, which I would suggest may be another way of describing evil, is when that ability to see beyond is cut off. And that's physical light. Now, after reading this, is physical light a bad thing or a good thing? It's actually a blessing not to be able to see. Because if we were able to see, then we wouldn't choose to see, we would see. But the ability to choose to see is actually a gift that God provided us with to allow us to establish a real relationship with Him. Okay? Now, hold on 1 second. One last thought. The word for light is or, with an aleph. Aleph, vav, resh. The word for skin is or. Ayin, vav, resh. Or ayin, resh. Now, to me, it's intriguing. I was thinking about this last week. To me, it's intriguing that the reverse of the letters of R with an ayin is ra, which is evil. And the reverse of the word for R with an aleph is resh aleph, which are the two essential letters of the root re'eh, to see. Now, that was a revelation that, I must say, just fell in. These things don't just happen from a thought process.
And of course, the two letters, Resh and Aleph, are missing the Hey, which stands for Hashem.
Perhaps.
Which is the concept of Tzimtzum that we can't.
Okay.
That we can't see God, because if you could see God, it's just like being able to see everything.
That's right.
And then if you could see everything, why would you don't have the opportunity to choose it?
That's right. So God hides himself, as it were, in physical creation. Now what's interesting is, physical creation takes place over the course of how many days? 6 days. The letter that corresponds to the number 6 is Vav. Vav is the letter of connection. So the fact that as we progress in physical creation, we're actually losing sight of God because all this stuff is being created and it is blocking the core of existence called God. Because now we have nature, Mother Nature, that somehow disguises the hand of God in the world. But as we progress through the 6 days, the buildup of all this veneer is actually there for our ultimate connection with Him. So that we need the smokescreen in order to connect. As ironic and as paradoxical as that sounds. But now we understand that the paradox of really good and evil is really the paradox of connection or disconnection. And it's the same paradox of light and darkness in this verse. The light of essence versus the physical light which blocks us. So one actually allows us to get to the other, and indeed, choshech is actually a critical element in our relationship with God. So is evil a bad thing? As strange as that sounds. The potential for evil is not a bad thing because we need to have the potential for evil in order for the choices that we make for good are real. But of course, with that potential comes the possibility of actualizing it, which we need to avoid.
Because if not, we would be like automatons.
That's right. If you're chained to your friend, you're not a loyal friend. You have no choice. So you're not rewarded, and you're not pat on the back. There's no loyalty over here. That's it. You're stuck. So essentially, when we talk about Vayavdil, that God set apart the light for the righteous in the world to come, meaning those righteous that were able to penetrate through the facade, through the veneer, will earn the reward for somebody like that. If I walk around with a mask so that nobody recognizes me, and somebody discovers who I am, is there a point in me continuing to wear the mask? No. If you know who I am, I might as well take it off. Boom. That's exactly what Rashi's saying in his first understanding. The Medrash tells us that God will save that light of essence, the awareness of the real reality, not what we see, but rather what's really going on. That will be set apart to those that earn the right to deserve to have that light constantly. Because in this world, they manage to part the screen to see what's really going on behind the scene. And the second explanation is that goodness, the light of goodness, if it's diffused by evil, the confusion that comes about from that is destructive. Because if we confuse reality, the way we see it, with what it really is, that's going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble. So there has to be a separation of sorts because of the light of essence is separated from the light of darkness. I know that sounds strange. The light of darkness versus the light of essence, since they're separate, at least it allows us a possibility of moving one out of the way to access the other, because now it's not confused. So, in one verse, the word vayavdel, the what? You're confused? It's heavy.
That I still it's the same question. I mean, I understand all the individual concepts, but to put them all together, if Hashem takes the light of essence away and sets it aside, then what's left?
What's left is the facade, the light of darkness, meaning the light that doesn't allow you to see reality, it just shows you the surface. It shows you.
But there's light of darkness and then darkness?
No, the darkness is actually the light of darkness, meaning the light that does not allow us to see the true reality, which we call darkness. And the reason why God set it apart is because I want you to penetrate through the veneer. If I gave it to you right away, it's meaningless.
So in the second half, the light from the darkness is really light in darkness.
Well, according to the second understanding, it's dividing light from darkness, not setting apart the light, but dividing it one from the other, so that each one serves its purpose in order to function in the way God wanted it to function.
So the light of the darkness is not really evil.
Not at all. In fact, what we realize is that evil itself is not even evil.
Because the light of the good light is sort of like that. I mean, when you say it's very straight narrow, you talk about the angels and all the references to angels.
Right. They have clarity.
Right.
They have clarity. There's no choice. They don't have free will. They don't need free will.
Free will.
They don't need free will. They don't have to choose. There's nothing to choose. It's obvious. So, God, why do you make it so hard for us? The answer is, that's the point.
Why is it bound by day and not by morning?
Good question. We'll get there. But at least in the meantime, a simple verse has such profound realities